Hi, my name is Tony Foster, and today I'm going to talk to you about step one. Now, before I get into that, just a quick review of my background. Coming up on 21 years of sobriety. I'm also a therapist. I have a PhD in counseling and a double master's in counseling and in mental health. So I have a pretty strong background in this area. I've also sponsored many people. I've taken probably over 100 people through the steps in a one-on-one format. I've also presented to groups the steps many times, as well as been through the steps as a sponsee at least 5 different times over my 20 plus years. So if you watched my last video, you saw that I took you through the steps just briefly on each step over about a 20-minute time period, just to talk about each one, go through the blurb, and now I'm going to take you through each step individually, one video per step. And we're going to be using 2 books to do this. One is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is a paperback version I have here. And the other one, which we're going to use more so, is the 12 and 12, better known as the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. This book was written in the early 50s and was written more to clarify what was in the big book in language of the day, as opposed to the language of the 30s when the big book was written. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, what does step 1 say? And if we go to the front of the 12 and 12, it says, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Wow, powerless over alcohol. What does that mean exactly? For me, and it means something different maybe to you, but for me, it means that when I put alcohol into my system, I don't know what's going to happen next. On any given day, I could have 1 or 2 drinks, or I could have 20, and I could end up in a car accident, I could end up in jail. Who knows, but I can't predict what's going to happen. So I am powerless over alcohol. And in turn, my life has become unmanageable. Now those 2 things can be separate, but it's very, very, very common that if you're powerless over alcohol, that your life is unmanageable. Chances are you have relationship problems, you probably have employment problems, you may have health problems, so your life becomes unmanageable. Okay, so let's see more specifically what the books tell us. Now for the big book, I'm going to have to put on my glasses because the writing is a little bit smaller, but I'm going to just read you one paragraph. It's on page 30 in chapter 3, more about alcoholism, and it's the second paragraph and the beginning of the third one. Second paragraph reads, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we're like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. And that's just what I described for me. If you've lost the ability to control your drinking, then you may fit into this category. Admitting that we're powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable, that's part of the first step. But it's not just about admitting, it's accepting. Because I knew I was an alcoholic long before I became willing to stop drinking. So in order to be willing to stop drinking, I had to accept the fact that I was an alcoholic. So now let's go a little bit deeper into the 12 and 12. Okay, so if we go to page 21 of the 12 and 12, I'm going to read you some excerpts from this chapter. This is step 1. Again, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. The first paragraph starts out with, who cares to admit complete defeat? Practically no one, of course. Every natural instinct cries out against the idea of personal powerlessness. I don't know about you, the way I was brought up, I would never admit powerlessness. I would never surrender. I was told not to surrender. Those have become part of my weakness, that I can't admit defeat. We have to be able to admit defeat. That's part of the first step. Then going on to the next paragraph, which is one of my favorite paragraphs in any recovery book. No other kind of bankruptcy is like this one. Alcohol now became the rapacious creditor, bleeds us of all self-sufficiency and all will to resist its demands. Once this stark fact is accepted, our bankruptcy as growing human concerns is complete. So that is another way of saying we've reached our absolute bottom. We can only look up from here. So fully admitting and accepting that we're alcoholics and that we have to change is where we're at. So then the very next paragraph says, but upon entering AA, we soon take quite another view of this absolute humiliation. And I don't know if you were humiliated in your alcoholism. I certainly was on many occasions. But upon entering AA, we soon take quite another view of this absolute humiliation. We perceive that only through utter defeat are we able to take our first steps towards liberation and strength. Our admissions of personal powerlessness finally turn out to be the firm bedrock upon which happy and purposeful lives may be built. Now for me, what this meant was that from this point forward, I was a different Tony. The Tony behind me, the old guy, would do things that would cause humiliation. Sometimes I'd humiliate other people, but in humiliating other people, I was also humiliating myself. So now I don't do the things that I used to do that caused humiliation for others and myself. Okay? So on the day that I accepted step one, I became a different person. I could start over. I could have a clean slate. So we move forward with a clean slate. Wouldn't it be great to start your life all over again? Then on the next page it goes on to say the principle that we shall find no enduring strength until we first admit complete defeat is the main taproot from which our whole society has sprung and flowered. Okay? So admitting complete defeat in step one is really the point that we have to get to. It's okay to say we lost. It's okay to surrender. It's okay to accept defeat. Then we can wipe that slate clean and start over. The next paragraph says, then we had been told that so far as alcohol is concerned, self-confidence was no good whatever. In fact, it was a total liability. This is a key part of the step and a key part of all 12 steps. Our confidence, and to carry that to the extent that we carry it often, our ego, is a part of our problem. For me, it was the biggest part of my problem. I thought I could outthink the disease. I thought I was smarter than other people. I thought I was better than other people. I could do this on my own. I didn't need to join Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't need to go to treatment. I could do this by myself. Of course, there was no evidence I could do it by myself. There had been short periods of time where I was able to stop, but only for very short periods of time. Never longer than a couple of weeks here and there. And then I always wanted to pat myself on the back as my ego would come back and say, boy, you've done a good job. You've proven you're not an alcoholic, so you can drink again. And of course, I'd be right back into it right away. So then as we go to the last page of step one, we say, why all this insistence that every AA must hit bottom first? The answer is that very few people will sincerely try to practice the AA program unless they've hit bottom. For practicing AA's remaining 11 steps means the adoption of attitudes and actions that almost no alcoholic who is still drinking can dream of taking. Who wishes to be rigorously honest and tolerant? Who wants to confess his faults to another and make restitution for harm done? Who cares anything about a higher power, let alone meditation and prayer? Who wants to sacrifice time and energy in trying to carry AA's message to the next sufferer? No, the average alcoholic, self-centered in the extreme. Is that you? It was me. Doesn't care for this prospect unless he has to do these things in order to stay alive himself. That was definitely me. I went to treatment 3 times. The first time I stayed sober 5 days. The second time, I got drunk on the way home. The third time, I stayed sober because at that point, I was desperate. I knew I was going to die if I kept doing the things I was doing. So it was time to start doing something different. A therapist in treatment that third time said to me, Tony, the only thing you have to do, the only thing you have to change is everything. And I had to change everything. From believing in a higher power, to following directions, to doing sober disciplines every day. I would never do any of those things before, but I knew now, having lost 65 pounds in 6 weeks, having lost all my toenails, just fell out, I was in that condition. I knew at that point that I was going to die if I kept drinking. So I became willing to do certain things. I had the gift of desperation. The gift of desperation is something you never want to lose. If your ego starts coming back, the gift of desperation starts to go away. You start to become complacent. So the gift of desperation is truly a gift. Don't lose it. So that's step one.